Welcome to everyone. It's wonderful to see so many people here for the Sunday Speaker Series of the League of Women Voters of Johnson County. Our topic today is voter registration changes +1 or +2.0. Our speaker just informed us we get to hear about some other new and exciting developments. So I'm Patty McCarthy, a member of the League of Women Voters who serves on the Speaker Committee, and I do thank you very much for being here. I'm going to ask that everyone take a minute right now to please make sure your cell phones are on silent. And I want to thank the staff of the Iowa City Public Library for co-sponsoring the League's Sunday Speaker Series educational programs and for recording as well as televising this program about Iowa's voting law changes. So in 1920, after 60 years of work by suffragettes for the right to vote, the first priority of the newly formed League of Women Voters was to protect the right of all citizens to vote, with the view that voters should play a critical role in democracy. The nonpartisan league was founded just a few months after the passage of the 19th Amendment to the United States Constitution, giving women the same right to vote as men. And today the league's volunteer members continue to advocate for voter rights, register voters, and host voter educational programs like this one. 3 weeks ago, on January 1st, Iowa's new identification and registration law took effect, and we're very much appreciative that Don Williams of the Iowa Secretary of State's office came over from Marshalltown this afternoon to talk about it, detail the changes, and talk about some other new initiatives. Ms. Williams was selected as the Director of Elections by the Secretary of State, Paul Pate, in 2015. Before that, she served as the Marshall County Auditor and Recorder and Election Director from 1988 through 2014. She is a nationally certified election registration administrator who was on the National Task Force on Election Reform in 2000 and 2004. She was also the co-chair of that task force in 2004. You can read about her extensive credentials in our flyer, which is on the back table, which also outlines our other upcoming programs in the Sunday Speaker Series, because I know you'd rather just get to the program. So join me in welcoming Don Williams.
I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. I'm so glad when Linda contacted me. I love elections. I've been doing it for 30 years, and I know you all have similar values, or you wouldn't be here today. So it's always a pleasure to come and talk to people that are as passionate about one of the most important parts of our democracy as I am. We in the Secretary of State's office have been working since, probably since the 1st of May on implementing the new election identification processes, the Voter Integrity and Modernization Act. There are components in the bill that guide photo ID at the polls. There are provisions in the bill that increase absentee ballot security. There are also some very important provisions in the bill to encourage the use of electronic poll books. Now, I know if you're a Johnson County resident, Johnson County Auditor was one of the first to use electronic poll books. We believe that those are critical so that every precinct official can apply the law and every voter can get a uniform and consistent voting experience. So we felt that it was a really important part of the bill to encourage poll books through a revolving loan fund. It removes the financial barrier that some counties had felt was an issue, and really leaves no barriers for a county to implement poll books. Also in the bill is a post-election audit provision. The post-election audit provision will select precincts at random throughout Iowa No county will have more than 2. The small counties only have 1 precinct that they may have to hand recount. That's a final certification, if you will, that the voting equipment that was used on election day performed accurately. I'm going to go ahead and get into the ID portions of the bill, the registration portions of the bill, or that there aren't new registration portions in the bill, and talk about how we can make sure all our Iowans are voter ready. Through our education and outreach, when we brainstormed, we determined very early on it's not about ID. It's about making sure that voters are ready at every step. You all help get people registered to vote, and you know that that does no good if they don't go and vote. So we want to make sure that people are registered, that they come prepared with their ID, and that they vote. We're going to go over today timeline of effective dates, just the main points. What hasn't changed? Types of identification, ID at the polls, fail-safe provisions, absentee voters, education and outreach, and voter registration and/or absentee drives. What is voter ID? It's not photo ID. I misspoke a moment ago because that's just kind of what rolls off the tongue, but it's voter ID. Voter ID is simply verifying a voter's identity when they go to vote at the polls on election day. It's not used to establish a voter's qualification to vote. All registered voters in Iowa are presumed qualified to vote. When they register, if we can find that person and verify that there's a person, if their voter acknowledgement card makes it to their home and isn't returned to the county auditor, we presume that they're eligible to vote. What has not changed? Photo ID, and I say photo ID, has been implemented in states around the country, and it's a very controversial issue. We don't have photo ID, we have voter ID. And it has not affected election day registration. There are a lot of bits of misinformation out there that this bill changed voter identification. It does, or excuse me, election day registration. It does not. Voter registration, there is no change. You can still mail paper applications. I assume a lot of you work with the paper applications. You can register in person at your county auditor's office. You can register when updating or applying for a new Iowa driver's license or a non-operator's ID. You can register online if you have a non-operator's ID or a driver's license, and you can register on election day. There has been no change with the new absentee provisions to overseas and military voters. The new absentee timelines do not apply to what we call our UOCAVA voters. The absentee application, in case you didn't know, when they apply for an absentee ballot, if they are living outside the continental U.S. or an active duty member serving in the armed forces, the application for a ballot actually serves as a voter registration form as well. So we have an all-in-one for those individuals. There's a federal form on our website. Every base has a voting assistance officer that can help them get their application submitted. They can be submitted anytime within a calendar year, and they can check a box that says all elections allowed by law. So we've made it just as easy as we can for our military voters. We also allow electronic submission of the applications, electronic transmission of ballots, and active duty military outside the continental U.S. can actually electronically send their ballot back. Overseas civilians have to still mail that paper ballot back, but we've got some really neat provisions. So if you're ever coming across a member that is in the armed forces, a spouse of a member in the armed forces, or someone living outside the continental U.S., tell them that they get special privileges and send them to our website. That would just be great. What are the timelines for Voter Ready? In December, voters without a DOT-issued ID were sent voter ID cards. How did we do that? We took our existing active registered voter list and matched it to the DOT database. Then we were able to identify all of Iowa registered voters that did not have a driver's license or a non-operator ID and automatically send them a new voter identification card. At that same time, county auditors began issuing voter identification cards to people that didn't have that DOT match, and they also send voter acknowledgement cards to every voter when they change an address, when they change political party, when they change any information on their voter registration record. Timing, 2018 is what we call a soft rollout. Voters with that will be asked for ID at the polls beginning last Tuesday. Last Tuesday out in Woodbury County was the first election that implemented voter ID fully. 2018, absentee voters are required to provide their voter verification number on absentee request forms. And I'll get into the details of those two things as we roll on. So what is a soft rollout? 2018 only. Basically, every touch you have with a voter, every touch we have with the voter, every touch the county auditors have with the voter is an educational opportunity. The soft rollout applies to ID provisions only. What it means is if a voter shows up at the polls without ID, they may sign an oath of identification and vote a regular ballot. In other words, if they show up, if they have their ID, they should use it and get used to using it. If they don't have one though, they can sign an oath of identification, call it a teaching moment. They'll get a little piece of paper saying this year is the oath, but beginning in 2019, you do have to have that ID. Soft rollout does not apply to absentee provisions. Those are in full force of the law and those won't change. 2019, the soft rollout ends. So what kinds of identification are the primary identification? Obviously, an Iowa driver's license or a non-operator ID, the voter information card. We also have identified some additional documents that I'll show you in a little more detail in a minute. I mentioned the acknowledgement card versus the ID card. Every time a voter changes their record or when they register new for the first time, they are issued something by the county auditor's office. ID cards are only mailed to individuals that do not have an Iowa driver's license or non-operator's ID. New registered voters that match the DOT database will be mailed an acknowledgement card. If you don't, you'll get the ID card. They're issued by the county auditor automatically now as part of their weekly batch of mailings to voters. The voter registration system actually figures out which kind of acknowledgement or information card is issued based on the information in their voter record. So you can't mess up. It's automatically that voter does get the right piece of identification. We've had voters that have a driver's license ask for an ID card instead. They cannot be issued an ID card. The law says if you have a driver's license, that's what you have to use. That is the primary form of identification. Now, when we issue, we err on the side of caution. If there wasn't a perfect match, we sent an ID card. We have a handful of individuals across the state that have both an ID card and a driver's license, but the system is built so that you can't fake it out, and so you can't say, oh, okay, just for you, I'm going to issue an ID card. They can only be issued to people that do not have that DOT match. Even if they don't provide their driver's license, we can go out and find that through the magic of databases. Every ID and acknowledgement card has an educational component now. If you can notice, this is a voter identification card. Up in the upper right corner is actually the voter ID card. Doesn't have a photo. It has the voter's name. It has the voter's address, a blank for a signature with a big black arrow pointing to it. They have to be signed to be valid. There's a barcode that helps the poll books quickly and accurately identify that person. A lot of people have worried that ID provisions will slow things down at the polls. It's quite the contrary. If everybody has their ID out, those voters will be found just instantaneously through the barcode on the card or the barcode on their driver's license. District and precinct information is on that. And that is a portion that the voter can keep. The card will be removed. And then educational information. What a voter needs to do to vote at the polls, what a voter needs to do for absentee voting. So every time a voter modifies their record, they're going to get that educational component. The card on the right is the voter acknowledgement card. That's what I would get because I have a driver's license. So I would get that if I changed my record. It still gives the district information, gives the polling place information, and then the bottom portion of that, there again, is the educational component telling me what I need to do when I go to the polls to vote. That mailing that I talked about that we did was a one-time match. That was in December where we smashed all the data together, came up with individuals that did not have a current Iowa driver's license or non-operator's ID, and we came up with 120,000. Interestingly enough, we did a little bit of a public service to the DOT with this because there are in the voter file about 85,000 that don't have a driver's license number, but it got all the way up to 120,000 when you looked at those numbers and whether they were expired or not. So when people got these cards, they realized that their driver's license was expired, and there was this big flurry of rush to the DOT to renew. So that was kind of funny because we were expecting 85,000, we came up with 120, and it's like, what? And that's what we found. Also interestingly, people in Iowa, the driving privileges on your driver's license extend for 60 days after it expires. That's the culture in Iowa. When we talked to the DOT, we said, so how many people renew during that 60-day period? And they just shook their head. It's a lot. The culture is that that's part of when your license is good, so they wait till it expires and then they do their transactions with the DOT during that 60-day period. Knowing that, we decided to for ID at the polls on election day, accept that driver's license 90 days past the expiration. We know people automatically wait, sometimes up to that very last week before they could get a ticket. And we know that if they renew at kiosks, it might be 3 weeks till they get a piece of paper that shows they've renewed. So for ID purposes only, that license is good 90 days past. Now, I spoke about ID cards are automatically issued when an individual registers or changes their information if they don't have a driver's license. They're also automatically issued on the 61st day following the expiration of a driver's license. So we are doing everything we can to get IDs in voters' hands. And it's the magic of computers and matching databases has just made it's just elegant in its simplicity and the way it's fail-safe for county auditors and fail-safe for voters. Education information, that same information that we had on the voter acknowledgement cards and the voter identification cards appears on that letter. Here are some of the other IDs. At the top is a driver's license and the voter identification card. We also have other trusted documents, is what we call them. A U.S. passport, I don't know if any of you have a U.S. passport card. The card is only good in Mexico and Canada, I understand. It's less expensive than this. So some people that travel opt to only get a card. Veterans IDs, military IDs, those are all trusted documents that have photos, that have expiration dates, that are also allowed for identification purposes in addition to the driver's license, the non-operator's ID, or that voter identification card. So how is this going to work? ID at the polls, how does it work? I talked about what our trusted documents are. There's the list. I mentioned that a driver's license or a non-operator's ID can be valid for up to 90 days past the expiration date. Voters changing precincts, voters that are pending, they may also have to provide proof of residence. But if you're a pre-registered voter, doesn't matter what your driver's license says, if you're pre-registered, you're registered in the correct precinct, the only thing they're going to use is that photo identification, look at it, feel comfortable that the photo depicts the voter, and then let you vote a regular ballot. But it is important if somebody says, oh, I moved, that you understand that if they have an address change outside of their precinct, in other words, if I moved from Iowa City 1 to Iowa City 2, I would need to show my ID plus proof of residence if my address wasn't accurate on my driver's license. I hope you all have one of these. This poster walks you exactly through everything you need to know to explain identification at the polls. So as you go out and about, you may want to laminate it or tuck it away, bring several copies. This will tell you what you need to do. Proof of residence, I mentioned, is required if the ID does not match the address that the voter currently lives at. That's necessary for people that have moved and pending voters. What's a pending voter? You might be wondering that. A pending voter means they've registered, but there's a piece of information missing that they could not be fully registered and verified. So a pending voter does have to prove that they live in that precinct, either by their ID with a current correct address or their ID plus an additional piece of proof of residence. Those must be current within 45 days. Property tax statements, 45 days of the final payment date. There are like probably 10 different dates on a property tax statement. So we had to define which date, and that is the latest date on that statement. So that has to be current within 45 days. One of the things that's really neat that we're hopeful we will be able to get through legislation this year is we recognize that the way people do business has changed. And we recognize that a lot of people don't get paper utility bills anymore, especially students in a college town like this. They might get their cable bill, their cell phone bill, all of that on their phone. And so it's not in effect yet. It takes legislation, but we have requested that, explained to the legislature that this is not a radical change. It's just acknowledging the way people do business. So we're really hopeful. So watch for that. As the legislative session progresses, we're really hopeful that we can take proof of residence on a cell phone. Election day registration. We've heard lots of confusion around election day registration. People thinking that the bill changed EDR. It did not. In fact, well, I should be precise with my language. It did. It gave them one more piece of information that they can use for proof of residence. Our office has also, you know what? Proof of residence, they can now use college housing agreements. We have had our attorney look at the bill. The law says a lease, a residential lease. A college housing agreement is an agreement between the college and the student. It has an address. It's the same as a lease in the eyes of the administrative rules now. So a college housing agreement on college letterhead, if it contains the information, and we've had these conversations with all of the colleges, would serve as proof of residence. Election day registration, you can use an out-of-state driver's license and that proof of residence proving that you lived in Johnson County or Marshall County, wherever that person lived. So election day registration has not changed. What you will need to be precise in explaining is that none of these identifications can be expired. Even though Iowa driver's license or non-operator ID is listed, it has to be current. We didn't change the law. We fought to keep the law as it was, and so we could not legislatively build that 90 days into that as well. We all agreed to leave EDR alone, and so EDR identification cannot be expired. That 90-day grace period is not there for EDR identification. Never has been, and it remains the same. Fail-safe provisions. We worked really hard to build in fail-safe provisions into the law. If you're familiar with election day registration, you know that election day registrants that don't have an ID and that don't have proof of residence can use an attester. So that's one of our primary fail-safes. Pre-registered voters, if they don't have an ID, can also use EDR type documentation. And when might they do that? Well, college students would be a prime example. If a college student was pre-registered, but they lost their voter identification card that the Johnson County auditor sent to him or her, they could still use their out-of-state driver's license and proof of residence as their ID. That would be a perfect example of when a person might do that. In 2018, we have that oath of identification that I spoke of. That's only this year. An attester can attest for ID at the polls the same as they can attest for an election day registrant. And of course, any voter can vote a provisional ballot. Provisional ballots will be probably not used very much in 2018 because of the oath of identification. But if a person moved, was pending, and they didn't have that proof of residence, and they didn't have a proof or an attester, that might be for instance, where they would vote a provisional ballot. No eligible Iowa voter will be turned away. The attesters, and working hard to build in as many fail-safes as we can and acknowledge a situation where a family might go to vote together and only one of them has ID. We worked hard with the legislature, fought hard to get two attester. An attester can attest for two IDs. So an attester can attest to the identity of two people and the identity of an election day registrant one. I know that's confusing. Good news is the poll books keep track of it. The poll books handle it all in the background, but the down and dirty of it is if I were at the polling place and I knew everybody, I could attest for one election day registrant because that's the way the law was and that's the way it stayed, and I could attest for two people about their identity. Attesters now have to meet the same standard that voters have to meet, and that's show ID. They don't have to prove residency, but they have to have their ID. And when you think about it, it's completely logical. They're attesting for the identity of someone else, and we need to know that that attester is who they say they are. So, oath of identification is what's going to be primarily used, but voters changing precinct, if they don't have that proof of residence, an attester can attest for them just for their residence. Inactive voters or pending voters without ID may use an attester. And I talked about the number, 2 IDs, 1 EDR.
So it's 3 total.
3 total, yep. Provisional ballot. What's a provisional ballot? It is provided to a voter anytime a voter's eligibility is not certain. If the precinct official cannot with certainty know that that person is eligible to vote a regular ballot, they're offered a provisional ballot. That might happen if a voter requested an absentee ballot. They're shown as having voted, so they vote provisional. And in a moment, when I get through this, I'll kind of explain some of the behind-the-scenes details. If the voter did not have proper ID, or if they didn't have proof of residence, if they were one of those movers, and that was also required. If a voter doesn't have their absentee ballot to surrender, they vote provisional. The voter doesn't need to take any additional action. That provisional ballot inside a sealed envelope is matched to the absentee records. If that voter's absentee ballot was never returned, if it wasn't counted on election day, then that provisional ballot is automatically open, counted, and added to the totals. If the voter's absentee ballot was turned in, then it's never opened and no one ever knows how that voter voted. Provisional envelopes have everything the county auditor needs to establish that voter's identity on it, and they can do that background work. If a voter did not have proper ID, they will be given a slip of paper saying, before your ballot can be counted, you do need to appear at the county auditor's office and show ID. Basically gives the person another couple of days to cure their ballot. That's what we call it, cure it. ID review, both signature and appearance. People are really nervous about signature verification, or what if I don't look like I look like on my driver's license? Poll workers, if this was my driver's license, poll worker's gonna look at that, and as soon as they're comfortable that Dawn Williams is the person standing in front of them, they're done. They don't sit and match the signature on the driver's license to the signature on the declaration if they're confident that Dawn is Dawn. If Dawn dyed her hair black and had it down to her shoulders all of a sudden, and she'd put on 50 pounds, she didn't look like her driver's license at all, the precinct official might look at the signature. They look at the ID as a whole and use everything on there to make sure that the ID depicts the voter. Signatures are presumed to be valid. The appearance of the voter is presumed to be valid. It's just, those are both pieces of information with the ID that can be used if there is a question. Precinct workers aren't there trying to decide if Dawn's signature in 2017 matches Dawn's signature in 1976 when she registered to vote. Rubber stamps are valid. Voters use rubber stamps at time, voters use marks at time. Those are valid. It's whatever that voter's normal method of signing is. If a voter uses a rubber stamp and they can't apply it themselves, that rubber stamp has to be applied in the voter's presence. You can help a person, you can't do it for them. The distinction is you have to be in their presence. And if Dawn broke her arm and she didn't want to ever write again with her right hand, and I started signing everything left-handed, I could update my signature on file just by filling out a new voter registration form. That's the most current, that's now my signature on file. One of the major provisions of the Election Integrity and Modernization Act is absentee ballot requests. A voter verification number is required. When we talk to county auditors and we say, you know, what are you worried about? Where are the vulnerabilities in elections as we conduct them? And almost without fail, county auditors will say, the vulnerability is in the absentee voting. It's hard to tell if this application was from the voter, if this ballot that came back is from the voter. That's where we all recognize any vulnerabilities are. So a voter verification number is now required. You'll note this yellow highlighted box. That box has always been there. It has always said Iowa driver's license. The second line used to say last four of your social security number. Now it says voter PIN number. That's the unique number. It's confidential that comes to the voter on their voter identification card. So if they have a driver's license, that's what they have to put down. They won't have a PIN. If they don't have a driver's license, they will put that voter verification number. Contact information, because we're requiring new information and can't process it without, contact information is now more important than ever. Right here is a line, and you know what? People are really reluctant to put a phone number or an email. We recognize that, so we hope we made it a little better and provided a checkbox that says, do not add this contact information to my voter registration record. If you are out helping people fill out absentee applications, we really appreciate it if you work hard to get that contact information so that if there's a problem with the application, the voter can find, or the county auditor can find that voter and straighten it up. The verification number I already mentioned, it's the driver's license, the non-operator ID number, or that PIN. Nursing home voters and UOCAVA, those military voters, are exempt from that voter verification number requirement. Voter verification number is confidential. It is against the law for persons collecting absentee applications on behalf of another person to collect the voter verification number. So if I were working for a candidate or a political party and I was going door to door collecting absentee applications, it's common practice for them to write down the person's name, their address, as much information off of that application as they can gather so they can follow up and make sure that voter submitted their ballot. We expect that will still happen, but it's against the law for them to write down that confidential number, that driver's license number or that PIN number. It's always a voter's prerogative to mail in that application themselves if they want to protect that number. If there's missing information on an absentee ballot application, there are provisions in Iowa law for how a county auditor handles that. They have to contact that voter immediately. Immediately means same day, if at all possible. They have to send something to that voter through the mail also within 24 hours. And for example, if a voter verification number is missing, if the county auditor can get a hold of that person and that contact information was there, they can ask certain security questions that only that voter would know. If they're confident that they're speaking with the voter, then they can fill that number in with the voter's permission. But it takes a direct contact with the voter. And so that's why it's really important if you're out there helping individuals that those forms are filled out completely, because at a minimum, it's going to slow it down a day, and the timelines have gotten shorter. At worst, the county auditor can't get a hold of them, and that can never be resolved. Absentee timelines. The legislature chose to modify absentee timelines. Applications cannot be submitted more than 120 days before the election. If they are submitted more than 120 days before the election, it has to be returned to the voter. So that's not a good thing, because what the voter remembers is they already filled one out and they sent it in. They may not remember that, oh yeah, it came back and I have to send it again later. So it doesn't do anyone any service to collect them more than 120 days out. Voting cannot begin until 29 days before the election. That means that's the first day to vote absentee in the commissioner's office. It's the first day a satellite voting location can be open, and it's the first day that the county auditor can mail it. UOCAVA, those military voters, are exempt. The county auditor actually mails those ballots 45 days before the election. Nursing home residents may vote before the 29 days. I don't think that that will occur often because the focus further out is not as much for those residents. I would fully expect that the auditor votes those individuals during the last 14 days of the election, but they do have the authority to issue them within 10 days of when ballots arrive. So once that 45-day for the military voters hits, they're going to have ballots. It's possible that they're making their nursing home calls during that 10-day window. So you may hear that voting is occurring prior to the 29 days. That's why. Absentee ballot applications for ballots to be mailed ceases on the voter registration deadline. So in a general election, it's 10 days before the election. All other elections, it's 11 days. Voting can continue in the auditor's office. Voting can continue at a satellite voting station, but the last day that the ballots can be mailed is that same day as the voter registration deadline. That change came about because the USPS has downgraded their first-class delivery standards. And when county auditors were accepting applications through the Friday before the election, that was setting up unrealistic expectations. The voter thinks they're going to get a ballot, and they start calling the auditor's office on election day saying, I didn't get my ballot. Well, you know, it's out there somewhere. But that's the reason for that change. It really narrows that window. We know that. But the mailing deadline, the deadline to ask for ballot to be mailed at that voter registration deadline is more in keeping with actually having a successful vote by mail experience for those voters. And there again, UOCAVA voters are exempt. Applications for absentee ballots. The law speaks to deadlines. If it's collected, if you're going door to door collecting absentee ballot applications and you're acting on behalf of a candidate or committee or any political action group that is covered by Iowa Code Chapter 68, which is Ethics and Campaign Disclosure, you have a 72-hour deadline to turn them in, or by 5 p.m. on the voter registration deadline, that absentee mailing deadline. Applications received after that deadline must still be turned into the county auditor within 24 hours, and that county auditor is going to call that voter and say, hey, I didn't get your application in time. These are your options to vote. Now, the League of Women Voters, because you don't have to file campaign finance documents, you do not fall under this legal requirement, but we certainly recognize it as a best practice. It's to protect the voters, and we really hope that you can do your best to stay within those timelines as well, because it's absolutely in the voters' best interest. Voter registration drives. You all are the pros at that. I'm not going to tell you anything really that you don't probably already know. Voter registration deadline, 10 days before a general, 11 days for all others. Remember, though, that almost any Tuesday can be an election day. So there aren't just 2 voter registration deadlines in an even-numbered year. There are many voter registration deadlines, so it's always important for you to turn applications in at least weekly. And voter registration deadlines fall either on a Friday, in most cases, Saturday with the general. If you have forms and it's Thursday or Friday, think, you know what, these should go in. If you have a form in your hand on Friday, you should get it to the county auditor, because 10 days or 11 days from now, it might be an election. Education and outreach. With the bill, we have that's more than how we're going to, the county auditors are going to implement this law, how we're going to partner with them. Questions are about what's your education and outreach. And people are very frustrated when we won't say or can't say, we're going to spend $20,000 on this, and we're going to spend $50,000 on this, and we're going to spend $100,000 on this. We need to be nimble with our education and time things throughout the year. Iowans are registered to vote. Iowans have those IDs much more than in other states. We hear a lot about, well, this state spent $1 million. Why are you only spending a couple $100,000? Well, it's because we're Iowans that we have better opportunities with face-to-face with our voters. We have the soft rollout. All of 2018 is an educational opportunity. That first educational opportunity, we mailed to 120,000 voters with their new ID card and what they will need to do in 2018. Every time a voter changes their voter registration record, they're either going to get that acknowledgement with educational information or the voter ID, the same thing. We have worked extensively already, and we will continue to work with stakeholder groups. There was a representative from the league. We held a focus group and said, what's the best way to reach your residents? How can we help you help them? We had great attendance. I failed to grab those numbers before I left the office, but it was well attended, and it was just a very good back and forth discussion, both for the advocacy groups, the stakeholders, and for our office. Third-party mailings. There are groups that do mailings for voter registration drives that reach huge numbers of people. Voter Participation Center is a group that in even-numbered years mail tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of voter registration forms with a self-addressed stamped envelope to individuals they've identified that are not registered to vote, individuals that they've identified have moved. They send voter registration forms to those people. They have agreed to put information about new ID law in their mailings, and we're working with other groups, but that's one group that has long-standing and of activity in Iowa, and they reach huge numbers. Public service announcements. We'll be doing lots of public service announcements. Social media is something that we are continually surprised at how broad that reaches. Who all has Facebook? Probably easier to say who doesn't have a Facebook account. When we mailed those 120,000, we were literally able to pay a group to match our names to Facebook accounts and zip codes, and over 80,000 of those 120,000, had they logged into Facebook, would have had that information pop up in front of them. We did a targeted ad in Woodbury County with this House District special. Very, very good use of taxpayer money and much more effective than putting money into print media that not everybody pays attention to anymore, but if it pops up on your phone, you're gonna see it. So we're putting a lot of effort. We have a communication specialist straight out of college that understands how all of that works. I won't pretend to. My Facebook still says I work for Marshall County. But we're finding great success with that. And we can time things just at the time that people are paying attention. That's what's so exciting about that. Secretary Pate and staff are going on a 99-county tour. We're going to groups like yours. We're going to groups like the Rotary. We're going to veterans groups. We're going to college groups. So we are going on a 99-county tour for outreach. College voter engagement drive. We did one last year. We've begun reaching out to college student organizations and the colleges again. One of our initiatives this year is to ask colleges to make their student IDs with information sufficient to serve as a photo identification. It needs a photo, it needs an address, and it needs an expiration date. The colleges are hesitant to do that in the past because when Don Williams registers as a student at Iowa State University, sorry, my sons went to Ames. When Don registered as a student in Ames, that same ID card is the one she used for all 4 years. So from an economic standpoint, they're hesitant to put expiration dates on it. But we now have much more important reason for that to happen, and we're hopeful that colleges will see that and get those expiration dates, the photo, on those IDs. We have an app. It's called My Iowa Vote. On your phone, if you go out to My Iowa Vote, not only can you fill out a voter registration form on your phone, then it's mailed to you to sign and return. You can get notifications for elections. You can ask for an absentee ballot application. You can find your precinct polling place. So My Iowa Vote is an app that we think students are really gonna use. We push that hard with our college voter engagement drives. Voters, like I said, every time a voter goes to vote this year, it's an educational opportunity. Voters are our outreach. They're gonna talk about ID. They're gonna say, don't forget to take your ID to their family members, to people that they come across. Safe at Home participants, are you all aware of our Safe at Home program? Safe at Home is an address confidentiality program for survivors of domestic assault. It allows them to not have, think of all our government records, and those addresses are public. So it allows them to have an address in Des Moines for those records, even on their driver's license. In the background, we know our office administers that. Public safety has access to their real address, but it allows them to mask their address on things like their driver's license, property tax statement, utility bills, and there's a post office box in Des Moines that doesn't look like a post office box. It looks like a physical address, and we pick up mail every day, sort it, put labels on to that Safe at Home's participants' actual residence, and redistribute their mail out to them. Built into Safe at Home, we have an automatic absentee program similar to the military. If you say, I want all absentee ballots this year, those are automatically sent to those people. So every time we work with our Safe at Home participants, every time we say, do you want to have an absentee ballot, all of those touches now include ID information. Iowa State Association of County Auditors. The county auditors are tremendous partners. They want every voter to have a pleasant and rewarding voting experience. And so part of that pleasant and rewarding voting experience now, whether you believe in the idea behind it or not, is making sure that your voters come ready. They're voter ready. Iowa County Attorneys Association. Election misconduct. If somebody does break the law, what happens? You don't hear about that very often, do you? The law requires suspected instances of voter registration fraud or election fraud, double voting, to be turned over to the county attorney. So county attorneys don't know election law. They know prosecution law of the more traditional crimes, I guess you'd say. So we're working with the Iowa County Attorneys Association, getting that information out to them. We have a new toolkit, Voter Ready Toolkit, and I'm going to show you in a minute how you can sign up for that and get access to some information. And of course our website has a whole area on it for voter ID. There's FAQs, there's all kinds of information about voter ID on our website. Where'd the slide? Just a minute. Okay. So please help us make sure voters are ready. Remember, we want them to register, we want them to come with their ID, and we want them to vote. We have a toolkit, so you can help us help them. It's available through a special website, and why is it just not on our publicly facing website? It's because this information is going to change, it's going to be modified, we're going to continually add press releases, infographics, social media messages, email templates if you want to send an email out to a distribution list, FAQs. By having a website where you have to sign up for it and have a logon, we know who you are and we can push information back out to you. So you can pull information down, but we can also push it back out to you. So that's why we have to have a login to be able to do that. We have a person in our office assigned to doing that. The email address is right there. It's Christina.Alexander, and that's spelled not traditionally, ALEKSANDER at sos.iowa.gov. That toolkit has the logo. If you want to put the logo on things, the sample email messages, election information, words really matter with how you describe election information. If you want to, comply and not lead a voter down the wrong way. So those sample press releases and those email templates, the social media messages, I think will be very valuable. It's just brand new as of last week. We are still building that out. So if you go out there and you think, oh, there's not very much there, just keep checking with us, because that we are going to keep that robust and current with timely press releases and social media things. So we really think that that is going to be a good tool for all of us, for us, the county auditors, for you. So we're pretty excited about that voter ready toolkit. So that is the end of my prepared presentation. I can take questions about voter ID. I can tell you more than you ever want to know about how voting equipment is tested and prepared. This is just kind of potpourri for the next half hour of anything you want to know about elections, because once you get me going, it's hard to get me to stop. So, questions?
First, let's thank Dawn.
Oh.
All right, and because we are televised, if you have a question, I'll bring the microphone to you so that we are sure to capture that.
Any questions?
I want to know about the poll books. Are the counties responding to the loan? Are they?
Yes, we've really felt like we've had great success already. We're not going to call it fully successful till all 99 counties, but to date, there's only one county that has not taken some action and made some type of commitment to implementing poll books this year. They won't all be implemented by the primary. We hope that by the general, all but maybe that last holdout will have poll books. We've got one big urban county that's reluctant, says that money is an issue when you're dealing with that many more precincts. Frankly, I don't buy it. I used to be a county auditor, and the bigger your county is, the bigger your tax base is. So the ability to pay should be the same. But it is a big commitment. I do buy that. I do understand that. But we just can't place enough importance on making sure every voter is treated in a uniform and consistent manner. You all are really lucky. The Johnson County Auditor was just right there when poll books came out and implemented them countywide. He's very, very on top of it and very responsible and very forward-leaning along those lines. But there's only one of our very smallest counties that hasn't taken any step yet. Last week it was 2. This week it's only 1.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
To follow up on that, what about recruiting? What about recruiting precinct election, poll election
Precinct election officials.
officials? Yeah.
Yep. You know, I implemented poll books when I was the Marshall County Auditor, and I thought, oh, how's this going to go? Because the average age of my precinct workers, especially in a rural community like Marshall County, is definitely up there. And I couldn't have been more wrong. People were apprehensive. my Aunt Genevieve was a poll worker, and during precinct worker training, she's pointing her mouse like she was pointing a remote control TV. But by her first election, it is so user-friendly, it's so easy to use. After they had one election under their belt, they wouldn't do an election without them now. Those same people that may not have been immediately comfortable with technology, before that, they literally stay awake the night before the election thinking, okay, do I remember how to do this? Do I remember how to do that? It's hard to be a precinct worker. So our traditional precinct workers have embraced it fully. Additionally, I think I can say this without insulting people. What I found when I was at Marshall County is the fact that I had laptops now instead of notebooks that you page through brought in this whole new group of people willing to serve as precinct workers, because then all of a sudden they were the cool kids. This was a job that was worthy of their expertise, I guess, if you would say. So it really was neat to watch that evolution. The non-technology people embraced it fully, and we brought in whole groups of technology people as well. Back there, she's been patiently waiting.
I have two quick questions. The first has to do with ID. When you first get a driver's license, you get a little piece of paper that sort of has your fuzzy picture on it. Do those count as ID?
Those do count as ID.
Thanks. And,
Yep.
and the second question is, can you explain just a little more how it is that ballots get to nursing homes?
Oh, happy to do that. Nursing homes are, by definition, licensed care facilities where nursing care is required. Assisted living facilities do not receive those absentee special treatment other than dementia-specific units. So nursing homes, hospitals, any licensed care facility, if a voter at that facility asks for an absentee ballot, it is hand-delivered to them by one Republican and one Democrat. It's traditionally done during the 2 weeks prior to the election. Those individuals are there 1R and 1D, and they can assist the voter if they want help. They can let the voter vote independently and just wait in the doorway. The voter can have anyone they want to help them. So if a daughter or a son wants to be there, they can find out what time the special precinct board is going, and they can help that person. But the important thing to remember is the two precinct officials always remain in the room to make sure that that voter is expressing their own choice. New in the law last year is that assisted living dementia-specific facilities are also covered by that same law, and people were alarmed by that. Well, if they're there in a dementia-specific facility, why are we taking absentee ballots to them? It's for the protection for the voter, to make sure that family members aren't voting their ballot for them, that caregivers aren't voting their ballot for them. If a person asks for a ballot, we will deliver it to them. If they can express their choice, they can vote. People have good days, they have bad days. They may ask for a ballot and then not be able to express their choice on that day. We'll ask if there's likely to be a better day. Sometimes if you go in the morning, afternoon's better, or vice versa. So the teams try really hard to deliver that to the individuals on a good day. But if they get there and the voter isn't able to express their own choice, they bring the ballot back and mark it not voted. So prior to this, those people were wide open to somebody saying, you know what, I know my neighbor is in an assisted living facility, they're in a dementia unit, and I'm going to vote their ballot for them. So it's a protection for them. People that are admitted into the hospital during the 3 days before the election get special absentee privileges. Family members can help them. Poll watchers are not allowed at nursing homes. These are people's homes. It's not a public building. It's just that team that's trained how to do their job, and it's an R and a D. Other questions around that? It's really, really very very neutral and nonpartisan in its delivery. County auditors will have family members just furious that they wouldn't mail the ballot to them to take to mom or dad. Well, mom or dad needs to be engaged in that process from the beginning to the end. And those are protections for those voters that are dependent on someone else for their care and possibly more susceptible to peer pressure.
A follow-up on the electronic poll books, the training for that. Has that changed, expanded, and how's that handled differently since it's now all counties?
Training for the electronic poll books is the responsibility of the county auditor. There are several different vendors, if you will, that have electronic poll books. 72 or 73 of Iowa's 99 counties use a poll book called Precinct Atlas. That's what Johnson County uses. It was developed by a county auditor. All the counties that use it own the program. There's a consortium. They drive development, they drive procedures, and so that training is all done at the local level. Secretary of State's office does have a poll book that we support for individuals that want a different choice. That is an option, and there are vendors, any vendor that meets Iowa security standards can come in to Iowa and sell a poll book. But primary, there's two. There's a new vendor coming to Iowa, I believe has sold to two of the larger counties or is likely to sell to two of the larger counties. But that training is all driven by the organizations. The neat thing about the poll books is they've all been reprogrammed to put ID law into place. And if a precinct worker follows the screens and answers the prompts accurately, they cannot make a mistake. And those have all been modified now with the new ID law.
I'm curious, I believe there are some states that have all vote by mail. Why not in Iowa?
You know, it's come up in the legislature a time or two as far as study bills go, and it doesn't appear that Iowans are ready for that yet. They still want to go to the polls on election day. They want that in-person voting experience. That's a policy issue. It's something that the legislature will or will not address, and there's a handful of states that have gone there. Iowa's not one of them. I don't try and get in the minds of the legislature. I'd lose it pretty quickly.
I just had a question about absentee ballots. Are voters allowed to turn an absentee ballot into the precinct on election day, or do they have to go to the auditor's office?
That's a trick question, or a two-part answer. It's not a trick question. Yes and yes. They can take their ballot to the precinct and surrender it. That doesn't mean they turn it in and that's what's counted. That means they surrender it and then they vote a regular ballot that gets tabulated in their precinct. Or if it's voted, they can take it to the county auditor's office and it will be voted and tabulated with the absentee precinct. Does that?
Yeah, I think so. So taking it in, if I took my completed ballot in for some reason into the precinct, they would spoil it, and then it would, and then I would just vote a regular one that day, or my completed ballot should go down to the auditor's office.
No, you would have to vote a new one. If you go to the polls with your ballot, you have to vote a new ballot. That one is destroyed. If it's in the envelope, which I would presume it would be in the envelope, they slit it enough to tell that there's a ballot in it, that you truly are surrendering your ballot, and then they close it up and write surrendered on it, and then you vote a regular ballot.
Right, and then, but if I didn't go that route, then I would just take my completed ballot to the auditor's office.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was wondering about homeless people being able to vote when they don't have an address or proof of an address. We do have people like that.
They do. And the key there is to pre-register. When you pre-register, if you're homeless, you can put a place that you normally return to sleep. It could be the Center Street Viaduct, it could be the Hope Shelter, it could be the Ped Mall. You have to list an address because every voter is tied to a piece of ground to be put into a precinct, but they can put any place they normally return. So if they are pre-registered, there is no additional proof of residence. Now, that when they register, the voter has to be matched in our database, either to the Social Security number or the driver's license number. Once that's done, a voter card is mailed. So when a homeless person, if you're helping a homeless person register, you want to make a notation of that or ask them to use a public address. Most counties have a public address that they can tell people to use for mailing address so that that voter acknowledgement card doesn't bounce back. That is important because otherwise you get caught in this loop where you're active and then inactive, active and inactive. But the surest way is to register ahead of time and then give an address that that voter acknowledgement card can land at.
What happens when an older Iowan surrenders their driver's license?
Once that driver's license is no longer valid, once it's expired, they will be sent a voter ID card.
So I'm looking at these lists of how to pre-register, and it looks like if you, for whatever reason, have an out-of-state ID, if you're a student or you just moved to the area or something, you cannot pre-register. You can only same-day register. Is that correct?
These are identification requirements at the polls. There are no identification requirements to pre-register. So a student with an out-of-state driver's license would fill out a voter registration form, put the last four of their Social Security number on it. The auditor enters them into the voter registration database and then would send them a voter ID card to the address. This is for what kind of ID is needed at the polls.
I have 3 questions. I'll try to be brief.
Oh.
So as a UIowa student, I know that we do not have expiration dates on our IDs. That has been brought up to the university before through student government and through graduate student government, and the university doesn't feel like it's something that they really need to invest in. Has the Secretary of State made any efforts outside of what you mentioned on saying how important that is, because a lot of other Big Ten universities do have expiration dates on student IDs?
In my email is a draft letter to the universities. We are not going to quit trying. We may need to eventually use legislative options to make that happen. That will not happen this year. We don't want to confuse asking for the colleges to put that on there with ID requirements as they stand here, because the worst thing we could do is have somebody listen to the wrong soundbite and have them come to the polls. In an off year, in an odd numbered year, we may go to the legislature and ask for a legislative help.
My second question, so I have been a poll worker before, and I've noticed that a lot of times people will bring in their provisional ballot on election day and say that they just didn't fill it out, or that they didn't have time to, or that it's important for them to actually vote on election day. I'm wondering if the office has done any, statistical analysis on how much that costs, because it costs the taxpayer when people, order the provisional ballot and then they turn it in on election day, because then they decide that they want to actually go to the polls. And I've just seen it happen so often. I wonder, how much is that costing?
We do not do those statistics. Issuing the ballots is a local issue. There are many local management decisions that go into how those are mailed, what kind of envelopes, and so forth. when I was the Marshall County Auditor, every absentee ballot that was mailed cost me $2. The ballot, the envelope set, the postage out, and the postage back cost $2 for every absentee voter that voted through the mail. It's slightly less when they vote in person, or it's much less because you don't have the outgoing and the returning postage. But we don't have hard numbers on that, you know, how many are surrendered and not used. And, you know, no excuse absentee is something we're very proud of in Iowa. We think it really helps our people. And there's some things you just might not want to know. And that's the cost of that. But $2 a voter in Marshall County.
Last question. So I know for transient or homeless voters, when they register to vote, they need to have an address that you said where they can receive mail. It usually takes, you know, 3 to 5 days, if not longer than a week, for people to then receive their voter registration cards in the mail. If someone leaves the shelter house here or the shelter for DVIP, they're not going to receive that card. So what are their other options if they want to vote?
An attester, and that's sometimes hard for a homeless person. It's not a perfect system, and a homeless person has to work through that, receiving that piece of mail bit, and we realize that that's hard, but we have to have every registered voter tied to a piece of ground in a precinct, and unfortunately it's a bit harder for them, but it's not insurmountable. In Marshall County, we had an address. If somebody asked, whether they listed the homeless shelter as their permanent residence, the mail went there, and we just asked them, if there's any voter registration mail, hold it. Just hold it. Don't send it back, because then that makes it good, as long as it doesn't come back. And I would expect that most county auditors have some kind of provision similar to that.
Any other questions?
Just thinking about this for students who oftentimes do change residence once or twice in a year, and let's say they've registered and they have their student ID, but things have changed and maybe they aren't in class for a semester. Obviously, there's no expiration date right now, but they could still use that ID, but their address is changing. If they ask for something to be mailed to them, are they so they automatically come back to? Is that how the auditor's office would
No.
work? So they'd get that and follow up on it, or is it just lost?
No student ID that we're aware of in Iowa has an expiration date.
So it won't matter.
So those aren't valid. What is valid for them, though, if they're not an Iowan going to school in Iowa, is their out-of-state driver's license with proof of residence. That's what's valid. And if they pre-register and they get that voter information card, that's what they use. Then they don't even, you know, the key to it all is pre-registering as many people as you can.
And I was just thinking more of if they were waiting for that registration card to arrive and they moved, that's,
They could go to the auditor's office in person and update that record.
okay.
They can use an attester. You know, most college kids know somebody else in the dorm, or, you know, can just hang out at the polling place, tell somebody they know, you know.
Okay, so my understanding is that online registration is available only to people who have an Iowa state-issued identification card. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so if no ID is required for registration, why is it that the online system doesn't support people who don't have an Iowa-issued ID registering online?
For security reasons, to prevent robo-registration, computer algorithms registering bunches of people, the DOT has seen that person. They know there's a real person there. They have a signature on file. Iowa has to have a signature on file, and if they don't if they don't have that state-issued driver's license, we don't have a registration on file. That's the reason. Iowa doesn't recognize for voter registration purposes or absentee voting purposes digital signatures yet. That's an issue for the legislature to talk about.
Okay, any other questions?
I'm a college student here, and I know that with the using your university address and having that ID card is something that definitely should be worked toward. But out of curiosity, do you know any other states that are trying to get something like this done? Because I have a lot of friends who don't go to school in Iowa who that could be really useful for in like further elections.
You know, we have some good resources that we can track what other states are doing. The college IDs is not one I believe we've done that research on, because we're just trying to get ours going that direction. But that's certainly something we can stick an intern on at some point. We love our interns and law clerks.
Okay. Thank you very, very much. Let's thank Dawn one more time.
Thank you all.